Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well and happy and healthy. Welcome to this EPC briefing on the Turkish economy. I think we can all agree that the Turkish economy has been in the headlines really many times over the last few months, and even most of last year and probably even earlier, and unfortunately not for particularly good reasons. We've seen in the last months a really strong devaluation of the Turkish lira to US dollar, losing, I think, around 40% of its value. And with it, we've also seen an inflation that is absolutely skyrocketing. According to the latest figures that were released, I think this morning, I was looking, in January, inflation was over 48%. I mean, these are the official numbers. Some experts actually put inflation much higher. I've seen it at around 80%. I'm not sure if it's possible it could be that high, but I'm sure we'll hear more about that in a moment. There are also structural problems with the economy. Unemployment is really high, particularly in certain groups, for example, among youth. And when we look at Turkey's trade deficit, it's more than tripled in January. I mean, this means that President Erdogan's plans to create a current account surplus may be in trouble. Now, I remember that when I first started to work on Turkey a long time ago, right back in the beginning, which was in 2001, actually, and it coincided with another financial crisis. I mean, this was a major financial crisis. I remember that there was a huge row that took place between the then Prime Minister, Bülent Ecevit, and the then President, Ahmet Necdet Sener, who apparently threw a copy of the Turkish constitution at Ecevit's head. And this argument was all about the financial crisis. Now, back then, Kemal Dervish, who is now at the Brookings Institute, was brought in to rescue the situation, and he actually did that. But I'm wondering, in today's situation, I mean, is it as bad as back then? Maybe it's even worse, and maybe, you know, Ankara needs to find another Kemal Bey. But today we're joined by two experts in this field who are going to share their views and ideas on what's going on in the Turkish economy and what we can expect going forward. First of all, Enes Özkan, who's an economist and co-founder of Daktilo 1984. And secondly, Özge Oner, who's an associate professor at Cambridge University. I'm going to ask the audience, when you put your questions, can you please put them early on so that I can include them into this debate? And as everybody knows by now, you can do it either by clicking on the hand icon and give your question physically. I mean, I like to hear other people's voices, so that would be nice. Or you can also put your question in the chat or Q&A box. I'm never sure which one it is actually, but please do put your questions. So now I'm going to start this discussion, and I want to turn the floor first to Özge, ladies first, and ask her to sort of summarize in like 7 to 8 minutes, how bad is the economic situation in Turkey today? I mean, is it as bad as it was back in the early 90s, or could it be even worse? I mean, for example, during the days of depression of the 70s, or is it not as bad as either of those instances? So I would be really interested to hear your views on this.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for inviting us today. It's always a little bit complicated to summarize the affairs and economic affairs in Turkey, because there's there's always a longer and a shorter description of the structural crisis that the country is going through. Some of the things that we're experiencing today can be attributed to the recent economic turmoil, but the rest of what we see as negative aspects of the economy can be attributed to a long run erosion of the institutional capacity in the country, so that we are experiencing an institutional deficit, I must say. In terms of the economy, let's start there, and then we can maybe discuss other matters that are related to the crisis at hand. But I like to call this abdication of reason, sort of abdication of reason meets Islamonomics, you can call it almost. It is, so the Turkey's current economic crisis is a textbook example of what not to do with interest rates, actually. You may have seen this in the news, but in an address to members of his Justice and Development Party in the parliament before Christmas, Erdogan justified his decision to lower the interest rates during a period where the Turkish lira was plummeting with a verse from the Quran, which strictly forbids charging interest. He said, "I cannot stand by those who defend interests." And we knew that he had the sensitivity around interest rates as it is driven by some religious sensitivity, but there was very little room to act on it, because again there was some institutional capacity, some checks and balances, at least for a while, up until I would say 2015-2016 period. From 2016 onwards, we started experiencing a decline in the independence of central bank by and large, which led to several strategic errors in the economy. And I don't want to actually call them errors, because these are conscious decisions that were taken quite repeatedly. For example, Erdogan fired sacked a number of central bank governors, and is extremely notorious for his unorthodox belief that this high interest rates cause inflation instead of controlling it, to the extent that we have seen in the news suggestions from his circle that even the academics or public intellectuals who suggest otherwise, who stand by the obvious textbook causal relationship between the interest rates and inflation rates should be sort of almost exiled from the public debate, that they shall be sort of tagged among certain circles. Yes, the Turkish lira sank to an all-time low against the dollar for several months prior to a temporary recovery. I think Enes will talk more about that, so I don't want to talk about the last rabbit they pulled out of the hat. But this situation initiated a dramatic inflation rate that we're experiencing today. So as you mentioned, today they declared official inflation rate to be close to 50%. And we knew that as early as November, some of the independent academics estimated this inflation rate to be at that point in time 60%. And right now there's an argument to be made that we are actually quite close to 3-digit inflation rates. So hyperinflation was something that we were expecting, since again, what we would deem to be strategic errors or monetary policy errors were being followed in a consistent fashion, to the extent that in the worst time possible, they kept lowering the interest rate. And right now they're trying to sort of stabilize the currency by way of rather unorthodox methods and instruments. Such as the last thing that they implemented with currency, sort of currency change protected deposit system, which we can talk more about in a second, which will require, obviously, the treasury to print more money, right? Since we have empty reserves. In terms of the politics of it, I think these strategies can be summarized as Erdoganomics. It's one man running the show to a large extent, and there has been very little forthcoming from the actual authorities or the institutional structures around the economy that justifies the existing agenda. Some cliches obviously uttered, such as boosting exports, attracting investments and creating jobs, but the obvious costs of rapidly depreciating currency and unpredictability crisis is very well integrated into Turkish economy, is not referred to. So it's always it's always discussed in the media, for example, right now, as if this is something that the country is experiencing as a part of a global system where all of the countries are experiencing similar things. So it's very, it would be rather common for you to just turn on the TV and see an anchorman or anchorwoman representing the inflation rates in terms of percentage change in different countries in relation to Turkey. Not necessarily the absolute change, and through making an argument for how pandemic initiated this and how it's because it's a global system in which we're experiencing energy crisis and so on and so forth. So that there's very little accountability. Reserves, I mentioned reserves, but last spring, I mean, this is, I think, an interesting bit because it started quite early, as I mentioned, despite the fact that this has attracted a lot of attention from our foreign observers over the past few months. The history is long, but one particular event, I think, has a political significance, and that's where is the $128 billion campaign that the opposition initiated last spring in April. They put up posters on billboards around Istanbul, the opposition, which was intended by Turkey's main opposition to embarrass and annoy President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his ruling Justice and Development Party. And it was referring to the melting of the foreign reserves, basically, in a very futile attempt to stabilize the dollar last year. And this sum actually refers to the dollars sold by state banks, fundamentally, to support the Turkish lira in foreign exchange markets. This unorthodox policy began around 2019 municipal elections, which you may know, that brought up brought home a rather large victory for the opposition. And these efforts were ramped up in 2020. When the coronavirus pandemic laid bare the lira's vulnerability. And this gambit worked, for example, because this right now, if you actually look at people's opinions around what's most important in the country, economy is by and large the most important thing, of course, followed by probably immigration, which we can also discuss about, since I worked on refugees quite a bit, if you have any interest in that part. Short-term actions. I mean, we can talk about how far this crisis can go in the Q&A bit, but I will, for the time being, leave the word to Enes, and we can come back to the industrial structure in Turkey and how that relates to current crises, such as real estate-based growth policies that they've been following, quite similar to some of the Central Asian countries. What it meant for inflow of capital from certain countries, and what kind of political negotiations are happening behind closed doors for example, attracting Qatar money and Saudi money and so on into the country to sort of boost the economy, most of which is done by way of real estate again. We can talk about that too, but I will pause here and let Enes jump in.
Thank you very much, Özge. I mean, I think you gave a really good overview there, and you've also raised a lot of issues that we're definitely going to come back to in a minute. But I want to also give the floor now to Enes, so he can share his views on this topic too, and also maybe explain a bit. I mean, why did policy change to the degree that it actually has? I mean, I remember at one point, President Erdogan was saying that he was planning to have Turkey in the top 10 economies in the world by the Republic's centenary in 2023. I mean, this doesn't seem, very likely. So I'm looking forward to hearing your views.
Erdogan says a lot of things, and these are generally populist political ideas, but we came here after most of years, and I want to mention a little bit more about the past, because the roots of how things got to these points are there, and although its origin are in the past, I would like to talk about a period in which we lived similar to what we are experiencing today, and will enable us to understand better what happened. I want to cover various milestones. President Erdogan's son of law, you remember, Berat Albayrak, and clarified some things on September 29 in 2020, saying the dollar rate is not important to me. The process which started before Albayrak made this statement and stands before us today as an obvious indication that the Turkish lira will rapidly lose value. During the Albayrak period, the pressure was put on the central bank, and 1 week repo auction rate was reduced. We use 1 week repo auction rate as a policy interest rate in Turkey. However, the market was funded through emergency mechanisms such as a late liquidity window. Maybe you know central banks have different tools for different circumstances. Generally, central banks give money to markets on policy interest rate, but in some emergency cases, the central banks gave money to markets using different tools. The late liquidity window is an emergency mechanism only. In the other words, interest rate was reduced, but the market funding was made from a higher interest rate. It's complicated. To not increase the interest rate, not only was the system complicated, but also the reserves of the central bank were melted, literally melted. In this process, central bank reserves of 1,028 or 140 billion dollars were sold to the market. This means central bank reserves were melted. Of course, this process did not last long, and both the head of central bank, governor of central bank, and the minister of finance, Berat Albayrak, were dismissed from their posts. The central bank governor, who took office afterwards, quickly increased the policy rates. The depreciation of Turkish lira was prevented to some extent during the period of the new finance minister and the new governor of central bank. But for Erdogan, who thought that interest was the cause of inflation, the very popular idea of Erdogan, interest rate was the cause of inflation. This was not a good thing, because in Albayrak's time, strange things were happening, not only about policy rates, but also about Turkstat data. Turkstat is Turkish Statistical Institute. In Albayrak's time, monthly inflation could never exceed 1.36, but the first monthly inflation announced after he left the office was 2.13. It's interesting. Besides the suppression of interest rates, inflation rates, there is something very interesting in Erdogan's presidential system. Inflation rates increase abnormally every time the finance minister changes, because they explain the inflation figures, they announce the inflation figures in previous periods so differently than that they break with the market conditions. After a while, truth imposes itself and inflation rate normalizes. It's a phenomenon. The worst thing for people who have been struggling with hyperinflation for many years is to enter the spiral of inflation again. Knowing this, Erdogan was not satisfied with both the inflation data and the increase in interest rates. In this process, Erdogan constantly presided over the central bank, and he criticized the interest policy with very harsh words. Özge mentioned about it Islamic reasons. It's about Islamic reasons. At some point, the market realized that interest rate could not stay at this level, and the rise in exchange rates started again. The head of central bank was also dismissed in this process. An interesting note, since Turkey transitioned to presidential system, no central bank, any central bank governor has completed his term. It's very interesting. We see this situation, maybe every institution, every government institution. So actually we started to get answer to question what next during the period of President Erdogan's son-in-law, Berat Albayrak, and got our response. Again, similar to what is happening today, the central bank's foreign exchange was being sold to stop the rise foreign exchange. And at the same time, it was said that we would grow with the Chinese model. Maybe you remember, they are not mentioned about Chinese model now, but they talked about it very much. Of course, it was not taken into account that Turkey had no similarity with China in terms of scale, labor market, or foreign dependency. At that time, interest rates were much lower than inflation. When the exchange rate started to rise, the Chinese model was introduced. Afterward, it was decided to sell reserves without increasing the interest rate to keep the exchange rate. There is no difference in purpose between what was done then and what is done now. But there is a difference in method. The moves made were creating a significant burden and pressure on central bank. These moves now create a great risk and pressure on both the central bank and the treasury. Currently, foreign currency protected deposits under the exchange rate deposit system, the government guarantees, maybe you don't know, government guarantees, it will cover losses should the interest rate they receive when the account matures be less than what they would have earned by keeping the saving in foreign currency. And the exchange rate protected system and government is taking a big gamble and putting all their stones to prevent in the increase in currencies. I'm almost sure that they will try every way to ensure this. Even lately, my biggest wish is that US dollar does not somehow exceed the psychological limit of 15 Turkish lira. At the moment, it is evident that the dollar will not be kept below 14 Turkish lira, and for this, foreign exchange is constantly sold through the central bank. Nowadays, we are struggling with this. If the dollar exceeds 15 Turkish lira, the government has the potential to take steps for much tighter capital controls, or maybe they make some other arrangements that will harm the fiscal discipline. They even started doing this, sadly. They firstly introduced the exchange rate protected deposit system only to individual accounts, and foreign currency deposits amounts in Turkey is nowadays $250 billion. After they are announcing this system, only $4 or $5 billion of foreign currency deposits were transferred to exchange rate protected deposit accounts. Then they extended the program to corporate accounts. Now they are integrated the accounts of Turks residing abroad in Turkish bank into this system. Özge, maybe you love this situation because you are Turkish resident. This is very bad for the treasury also. If we see a depreciation in the currency, the treasury will have to pay the difference between deposits returned and the depreciation. That will put additional burden over public finances. inflationary processes are not likely to disappear easily unless you follow a quite tight monetary policy. However, last month, Nebati said that, and in a Nebati meeting, I called these meetings as Nebati meeting because Nebati will be very happy. Nebati is our finance minister. Nebati will be very happy when he meet to someone and always smiling and saying, don't talk about interest rate, and just smiling. It's interesting guy. We have removed the policy rate from being a monetary policy tool. He said that. He just said, trust is important. We will appreciate the currency only with trustworthy. But Erdogan feels the need to securitize the problems he faces every time. There is often talk of an economic war. I don't understand how to build trust in such an environment. Treasury and Finance Minister Nurettin Nebati says that also interest rate hikes are never on the agenda at every meeting he holds. For this reason, the possibility of getting another rabbit out of the hat continues. This is one of the things that economists in Turkey are most concerned about right now. Yeah. I wonder what other rabbits will come out of the hat. This question is everyone's mind, and it's exhausting. But everything seems to be ready for the Turkish lira to depreciate. For example, this morning, January inflation rate was announced this morning, and according to Turkstat, monthly inflation rate was 11.1%. Yearly inflation was 48.69%. In Eurozone, yearly inflation is 5.1% per annum, and it's the highest rate. And according to Turkey, it's good. Also, also producers price index is higher than consumer price index. It's yearly per annum 93.53%. We are faced with that foreign trade deficit that has reached its highest level in the last 10 years. They are trying to increase our trade capacity, but we are facing last 10 years highest level on foreign trade deficit. The increase in energy prices increases Turkey's foreign trade deficit. In addition, this situation reduces the possibility of reducing the current account deficit and preventing the increase in the dollar by exporting, because their strategy is this. They are trying to reduce US dollars. They are trying to appreciate Turkish lira using the increasing the export. In January, the foreign trade deficit amounts to $10.4 billion. It's very high. This was also a highest deficit since September 2011. The current account deficit has always been one of the Turkey's biggest problem, and it is one of the most important reasons for the increase in exchange rate. In other words, we are probably experiencing the cycle of Berat Albayrak's time again. Let me remind you of this cycle again. First, interest rates rises first. Then the government takes a rabbit out of the hat to curb in the interest rate in exchange rates. Then unorthodox moves give short-term results. Then the government shouts out by all means of communication. We have very big communication building of President Erdogan, very big building in Ankara. But after a while, problems emerge more strongly. Then the government adopts an orthodox economic policy and increase interest rates. I think it's the cycle of Erdogan's economic policy. But what I'm saying is just a guess. The situation might be a little different this time around. Özge mentioned about some things about it. Because this time Erdogan uses religious terms much more in his statements on interest. He says that it is Allah's command or Islamic commands to lower the interest rate. In addition, after the change in Minister of Finance and change of the governor of central bank in the previous cycle, the vote rates did not increase as much as they expected after the decline in dollar. In other words, they may think that method is not help to stay in power. Erdogan constantly makes statements that will please his core base in every crisis, not only economic crisis. It even increases it so much that it transforms its base. As we all know, politicians are the voice of grassroots. If the politicians in front of us is a populist, this situation emerges much more strongly. But voters also transform themselves mainly by discourse of politicians. After a while, this causes the discourses to become more and more radical in the form of crescendo. Maybe you know the crescendo in the music. Erdogan has a religious base. For this reason, Erdogan expresses the arguments about religion much more strongly. The more he uses religious arguments, the conservative his base becomes. The factors that threaten the Turkish economy are not only caused internal problems, but maybe we will talk on the Q&A session about foreign policy problems in Turkey, and maybe we will talk about institutional problems. I think Özge will mention about it, and political situation in Turkey is very fragile. Maybe our opposition parties try to hang together there, but it's very hard situation because Erdogan always targeted all opposition leaders, and it is also very important for the economy, but maybe we will talk in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Enes, also for a really good, excellent insights into what's going on in the economy. And it's good that you mentioned these other points, because it's exactly what I was going to ask Özge to elaborate on the political and social impact of the economic situation. Because I mean, it's clear now that the support for the RCAP and President Erdogan has significantly reduced to its lowest levels. And we also know that the social situation in the country has become, it's become quite difficult. I mean, inflation, higher prices for basic foods like, eggs, bread, rice, these sorts of things. I mean, we've heard a lot of stories about Turks having to buy subsidized bread and these sorts of things. So, what's this social and political impact? How do you see it? Because Turkey is supposed to have presidential parliamentary elections in 2023. There's also a lot of discussion going on about early elections. But I guess that's quite a difficult decision for President Erdogan to make. Given the situation with the economy. So, I give the floor to you.
So, Amanda, there are two camps of people among the opposition a group of my colleagues and friends in Turkey, as well as within the Turkish diaspora outside of Turkey, are quite optimistic about the decline in support that AKP at large, but Erdogan in particular, have been experiencing. And then there's this other group of people who understand the kind of political power Erdogan holds and how far he can go to sort of preserve it, who may sound slightly more pessimistic. I really do believe that for the first time, there is a real chance for a political change in Turkey, but I can't go as far as to say that it is so done deal that whoever you put in front of, whoever you put against Erdogan will win the election. It's not that easy. And the reason is this. I think one thing that we often forget about when we think about the existing milieu in Turkey, not only in the economy, but also sort of the social composition and other types of tensions we observe in the society, is that this is a late industrialized country. So in my lifetime, I have observed, I mean, and I'd like to think I'm not that old, or I hope I'm not. In my lifetime, I've observed a huge transition from a relatively rural and sparsely populated parts of the country, people moving from more sort of agrarian, more traditional parts of the country into metropolis. And there's a different kind of sentiment around improvements in well-being and quality of life in Turkey. So we have gone through some of the structural changes that you may have observed in Central Europe, for example, 2 generations back. I sometimes, so I spent almost all my adult life in Sweden, and for the past 4 years, I've been living in England. And sometimes I realize, it hits me when I talk about my childhood experiences, it hits me that they resemble more with my colleagues that are about 20, 30 years older than me. So some of the structural changes that we experienced in Turkey allowed people to sort of enjoy a jump in quality of life, a jump in well-being since late 80s, early 90s onwards. And AKP came at a time that followed a very dramatic economic crisis, not as bad as what we're going through right now, obviously, but some V-shaped recovery coincided with the first reign of AKP. So they were doing a lot of structural changes in the economy, some of which could be applauded really, and that they were most needed. But because it coincided with this kind of V-shaped recovery, as an economist, I can safely say that there's no way of establishing actually a causal link between their political success and kind of sort of economic boost Turkey has experienced during the first or roughly first 2 rounds of governance by AKP. So people have this narrative in their mind that there has been some improvement, some significant improvement in their life. So the AKP supporters, this pious, more agrarian initially, but now a part of urban life type of voters I'm talking about. These are not very political agents in the economy. We always had Islamists in the country, right? But their vote, their share of vote never exceeded a mere 15-20% band, basically. So in order to be able to gain more than 50% of the support, and I mean, there are stats actually showing that nearly 6-7 out of every 10 voters voted for AKP at one point within the past 20 years. This is a big number, right? That it's impossible to call all of these people Islamists, or it's really, it would be quite silly to assume that they are voting only with some sort of religious sensitivity, but they believe, so that there's a very large share of the population that believe that some of the structural changes that Turkey experienced that were widespread globally, and particularly in Europe, which Turkey was an integral part of up until 10 years ago, was because of AKP. So this sort of mishap, so this period that Turkey is going through is something that we need to bite the bullet and wait out. because they know what they're doing and they will deliver. So that there's that kind of trust to this long run persistent political power that people have that's very difficult to challenge. And AKP knows that there exists this core trust to their political movement, so much so that they also believe that these people are extremely resourceful, right? That's another thing with these late industrialized nations, that you have ways of managing shortages and high inflation. You have this stocking culture, you come up with substitutes, people help each other out because there's still this communitarian thinking, even in cities, that resembles a lot with villages, so to say. So they believe that actually this stress test can be endured by their supporters, as long as they need, which is not perhaps in their mind such a long period before a snap election, right? So they're trying to sort of test one step at a time how far they can push the limit. And the moment they understood that it can't be pushed further, they started coming up with financial instruments. They're not new instruments necessarily, instruments of the past that we thought would never pop up again, let's say, the way Enes describes, such as exchange rate protected deposit system. So they understand that we don't have the reserves to pay back the loss that people will experience if they put their dollars into the scheme. And they keep expanding it. They expanded it to the corporates, and exactly like Enes says, now even the foreign, or rather, how shall I say, even the Turkish citizens living abroad can capitalize on this. So the more they expand this kind of scheme, the more money they will need to print. They know what it means to print money. They understand that this is going to cause further inflation. And they have absolutely no intention to increase the interest rate, which is something that they repeatedly express. So all of these are pointing at some perhaps strategy to have a period where you make the Turkish lira cheap enough to make Turkey an attractive trading partner, while sort of keeping people still within the limits of civil obedience, so that there's this, okay, we're going to lower the interest rate a little bit because this is what needs to be done, and it won't cause high inflation. One day you hear this kind of narrative from them, and the next day when there's hyperinflation, they try to sort of come up with an instrument to mitigate it, which is then challenging their own narrative, because then we should have expected a lower inflation, right? If the system worked the way they describe. So there's like this continuous inconsistency, sort of increasing the minimum wage a little bit, for example, was another sort of this like populist move. So look at this percentage increase in the minimum wage. Look how much we care about you, type of thing. They up the energy prices, they up the electricity, and then he pulled back some of this increase, and sort of presented this as, look, I care about your struggles. I'm going to help you out here. We're going to go through this war of economic independence all together, exactly the way Enes describes. And I'm sorry I talk too much, but I believe there's actually a bigger idea around why Turkey is acting like a dissident with absolutely no reason, why there's such abdication of reason. That I've been following Turkey's position in Brussels in particular, but within the European Union for the past 10 to 15 years. And anybody who tries to understand Turkish engagement in the EU during a period where European Union has been going through some existential crisis also. So, but that's a separate topic for another, I guess, discussion. There has been a paradigm shift that Turkey is no longer an ally to European Union, but rather a third party to deal with in important issues, right? Like refugees or the East Mediterranean security, or whatever is important at that point in time. Sort of a third party to negotiate with, but not necessarily with some prospects to be an integral part part of the union, not necessarily as a member either, but there was still some status assigned to Turkish involvement in the EU, even in the absence of membership or the prospect of membership, right? So Turkey stands further away from the European Union right now than it has ever been, ever since the establishment of the union, one can argue. So this is a way of forming an economic alliance with countries like the Arab Emirates or the Qatar and so on. Sort of trying to talk to them now, trying to sort of be more sympathetical towards the sensitivities of also the capital that exists in those countries, right? So when, for example, I mean, this is an interesting thing. When he made these references to Quran in relation to interest rates, some key characters such as Oman's Grand Mufti hailed Erdogan for slashing interest rates, right? And urged all Muslim countries to follow the suit. So that there's this kind of sentiment also. When Turkey was struggling a lot with the depreciation over a few weeks period, with no reserves to melt anymore, what happened? We had a swap agreement for at least $5 billion. This was right before the New Year's with United Arab Emirates. So our Muslim this is the narrative. Our Muslim brothers can always come and help us out, and we will unite against the Western Front and sort of stimulate an economic model that's not been tried before, and we will succeed together kind of sentiment. So yeah, I mean, for that reason, I don't expect any significant change in their sort of grand scheme of things in their strategy. But in terms of these minor changes, like what's going to happen to interest rates tomorrow, it can be 10 percentage points up, 10 percentage points down, and this would shock no one, right? So this is the level of uncertainty. Depending on the political climate or how they read the waters, how they read the existing capital in the country, or the relationship between their now brand new trading partners and financial partners, they can take any course of action. So that's why we say unpredictability is the only predictable thing in Turkish economy right now. So that's the only thing they're consistent with, that there's absolutely no consistency in economic policy.
Thank you, Özge. You really touched on a lot of different topics there. It's fascinating, actually. I mean, we could spend a long time elaborating on all of these different issues, but we only have like 10 minutes left. So I want to put a couple of questions now to Enes. I have a question here asking about the pandemic situation. I mean, is it being used by Erdogan in any way for his benefit, if I can put it that way? If you could answer that. And also maybe you could touch a bit on this issue of young people, because I mean, I have the impression there's starting to be a bit of a brain drain in Turkey. I mean, a lot of people are leaving. I mean, okay, partially for economic reasons, but also because of, we all know, the crackdown on fundamental rights and freedoms. I mean, how problematic is this going to be going forward, and how large is this problem? And I'd also be interested to hear again your views on, you know, Turkish foreign policy. I mean, Özge just touched on it, but if you could also touch on it. I mean, Turkish foreign policy and its impact on the economy, you know, how it's being used as a tool, and within that, you know, this whole issue of the customs union upgrade. I mean, I don't expect this to be happening anytime soon. But just for the sake of argument, I mean, how important would it be for the government at least get to the point of starting the discussions over the modernization of the customs union? I mean, how important is this for Turkey?
I want to answer the last question firstly. And the hottest issues, Ukraine and Russia issues, and the Russia's threat to Ukraine, with which we have established strong military relations, will also affect the Turkish economy. If this tension reaches its peak and conflict arises, the whole world economy, especially Europe, will be involved in some way. However, the Turkish economy will be affected much more unfortunately, the Turkish economy is very fragile and has much closer relations with Russia and Ukraine than other fragile economies. The engines of some crawlers, aerial vehicles, how call it, aerial vehicles without human, and planes produced by Turkey come from Ukraine. The engines of these vehicles. Most of the natural gas used by Turkey comes from Russia. It is almost impossible for Turkey to go out of the conflict between these two countries unharmed. The existence of a popular leader like Erdogan, who sees foreign policy only as a tool of domestic policy, this policy can further increase this damage. All these things I have maybe Russia and Ukraine issue is the hottest issue, and we will watch this situation very closely. But this brain drain issue, maybe Özge, you want to talk about it, because I know you are studying on this brain drain issue of young people. And I will pass my speech to you.
I mean, I don't study this in an academic context to the extent that I can't give you any reasonable macro numbers on the total number of people that moved from Turkey over the past few years. But from anecdotal evidence, we know that everybody is trying to at least have an alternative for what may come after the next election, because among the relatively more secular and well-educated Turks, there's this sentiment that this is the last exit. This is the last exit, basically. This is the last window of opportunity for any real change, which initiated actually a rapid brain drain. Number of engineers, doctors seeking to establish a new life outside of Turkey is increasing exponentially, that we know. Particularly these two occupations are overrepresented: engineers, Turkish engineers and Turkish doctors. And well, although, as you say, Amanda, although on paper the primary concern is this unacceptable impoverishment of the well-educated people of the country, that their relative wage is not even comparable to their peers in European countries, for example. I believe that the urge to migrate actually is significantly fueled by unsatisfied demand for democracy and individual freedom. I find this trend extremely dangerous as someone who left the country in her early 20s with the initial intention to come back. So the idea for me was to study abroad for a few years and come back. Every week I receive many emails from friends who are in their late 30s, early 40s, with families at this point, trying to seeking for alternatives elsewhere, even available to accept jobs that are not directly compatible with their formal education. And this also will have significant consequences for the Turkish economy as well, right? One thing that is quite evident, at least when we look at international trade related data, which we have done as an exercise when we were actually writing a report that Enes edited using Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom Index. Part of this index is about international trade or freedom to trade, international trade freedom. We see that the value added is in steady decline when it comes to what Turkey is able to export. And this is despite the fact that there has been a big emphasis on human capital over the past, I would say, 30, 40 years. You know, we have a good stock of human capital in almost every aspect of economy in Turkey. It is the institutional deficit that's the problem, that people are not able to capitalize on the kind of human capital that they have. So the engineers that move from Turkey to other companies in Europe excel in what they do. I have never heard a failure story ever. Same goes for doctors, same goes for most of the academics. But these people always talk about how little capacity they had to use what they know. The same I always say about the central bank. Turkish central bank is an amazing institution when you look at the capacity of the people that work there. Amazing economists. They really, you know, top level economists with solid economics education, amazing experience. But there's absolutely no institutional room for people to use their human capital. And that obviously has, you know, two types of effects. On the one hand, it's pushing people away to geographies where they can, to say the least, pursue their happiness. But also it will leave country with lack of capacity to produce high value added goods and services that can be traded, which then makes making Turkish lira cheap completely redundant, right? Why would you want to make your country cheap if you are able to, if you're able to produce things that are desirable in the global markets at that point in time? So we're not an entirely agrarian country, and on the contrary, actually, agriculture has been suffering from what we're experiencing right now in the economy tremendously so. And yeah, I mean, brain drain has two implications. One is the social implication, and the other is that it's going to leave economy in a completely different form and shape if this actually trend continues. I believe, I'm not going to name the company names, but from one government-backed company to based in Ankara, or I shall say institution based in Ankara, to one company in the Netherlands. In 1 year, I believe there's been over 40 or so engineers migrated with their families.
Wow, that's quite shocking, actually.
From one place to one place in one country, I'm talking about. Yeah. And these are all, I mean, at the very least, each household is a power couple, meaning in the literature, we refer to these households as power couples, where both of the spouses have at least a university degree and above, just like that. Yeah, it's striking.
I'm just going to, I mean, we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to take a question from my colleague, Maxim. He's going to give his question verbally. Natalie, can you unmute him, please?
Thank you very much. Maxim here. I participated in preparing this event. Thank you for these very insightful exposés. Özge, you mentioned the trust in the government, which appears to be a very important, as how I see it, component of keeping a certain social stability. And I was wondering if what Enes make of this comment, and maybe for both of you, how long we can realistically expect this trust to remain if the inflation continues to increase the way it's going. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maxim. And I have a question here. If you could say something about Turkey's relations with China, because China is always doing something somewhere, right? So that would be quite interesting. And as we've sort of run out of time, I would be grateful if you could keep your answers to these questions quite short. Thank you. Maybe I'll let you go first, Enes.
Turkey tried to find the credit for the canal for the alternative of Bosphorus. Maybe you know, but China don't want to give a credit for these type of investments, and some other energy centralized energy with coal centrals. Some coal energy centrals are that they make an investment. They make some investments of coal energy in Turkey, but I think maybe 2 or 3 years later, they are going to. They are not going to invest this type of investment, the coal energy investments. But I don't have a specific information, a comprehensive information about Turkish-China relations. I just know some investments of China in Turkey. But they are not. They don't have high interest as African countries in Turkey. They are only make some investments, and they have a bank in Turkey, ICBC, just one bank, and I don't have any comprehensive information about it. Maybe Özge, you know something about Turkish-China economic relations.
Thank you, Enes. So I'll hand over to Özge.
I don't have anything else to add on the Chinese bet either.
And I don't remember another question of Maxim.
So do you think the question was that? Do you think, and I'm actually curious about your answer too. Do you think this trust that I emphasized that's been built over a long period of time to Erdogan's government, or rather the stability of political power, will persist if the inflation rates keep going up?
Yeah, the trustworthy is. Yeah, we are sure the trustworthy is very important for economy, but the trustworthy, you can create trustworthy, but if you are a populist leader and you say something today and say something different thing another day, you can't create a trust in the market. And but they have day-to-day policies. They don't have a medium-term or long-term plans for our economic policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy. They prepare a plan. The bureaucrats prepare a plan, and after 1 week, we have to put the garbage of the plan, because the current exchange rate, foreign exchange rates, and also the head of institutions, and also the governor of central banks change in the midnight or something like that. Then we can't understand. We can't think about maybe 2 months later, 3 months later. And government also like this. They don't know also what they do himself after 2 or 3 months later. And I think they can't create a trustworthy. For this reason, the election is very important for Turkish economy. In our opposition parties, togetherness is very important, because they don't want to create trust. They just use trustworthy. They just use everything else for the stay in ruling party situation, for the stay the government. I think the coalition, opposition coalition, maybe wins both the presidency and the parliament majority. The things will change. But I know international investors or creditors or some institutions are not actually waiting for such a broad coalition and understand the reasons for this. However, any political change that will save politics from marginal discourses and bring it to a more central position will improve the Turkish economy. A strong alliance is not afraid to agree with, for example, IMF, agree with IMF in foreign policy, and it's not afraid to make up for its mistakes. And I'm really care about the elections. I don't trust the government to create their trust. They can't, and they won't. They are not going to create trust, I think.
Great. Thank you so much, Enes, and thanks to both of you. I need to close this meeting now because we've just gone nearly 10 minutes over, but I think it was really worth it because I do think that the insights that you have shared with us today were really interesting and valuable. I mean, I'm not leaving this meeting with any hope that the economic situation in Turkey is going to be significantly improved anytime soon. That's at least my reading of it. But Turkey is definitely going to remain a key country to watch in 2022. I mean, Turkey's never boring, is it? Perhaps we can all hope it was. But so many things are happening, and with the elections on the horizon, I think all eyes are really going to be on Turkey this year and next year for sure. So I'd like to thank both of you again for sharing your time today, for joining us, for giving us your insights. Thanks to the audience for coming along, for your questions and participation here this morning. I hope Özge and Enes, you'll join us again at some point in the future, because we're going to be continuing to follow developments in Turkey, the economy and whatnot. So I look forward to staying in touch. And to everybody, I wish you all a fabulous day and a good end to this week.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank